Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the latest in our Transformers series. My name is Chris Karate. I'm Vice President of Communications at the Washington Post and Head of Washington Post Live. We're really excited today to be joined by some of the top minds and leading disruptors in education, who are going to examine the new and innovative ideas that are really transforming our schools. We'll be talking about new approaches that are reshaping traditional models of education, from K-12 classrooms to university lecture halls. We'll also focus on how the latest technologies are being integrated into the classroom and look at the growing number of college alternatives geared toward preparing the next generation of students for the jobs of the future. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, the Whittle School and Studios, and our supporting sponsor, the University of Virginia. So now please welcome to the stage Chairman and CEO of the Whittle School and Studios, Chris Whittle.
Hi, good afternoon. Very nice to be with you this afternoon. We are pleased to work with the Washington Post along with the University of Virginia on the sponsorship of this installment of the Transformer series. We think it's very consistent with what we've been working on for the past 4 years, which is the transformation of K-12 education around the world. Hundreds of educators, architects, engineers, designers, technologists have been working on the idea of the first global school and what we also hope will be viewed as the world's most modern school. These will be major campuses in the great cities of the world, and our first two are under construction as we speak and will open here in Washington, D.C. And in Shenzhen, China this coming fall, each for about 2,500 students from K to 18, 15 grades each. These are schools that we hope will be models of progressive education in the cities and countries where they are based. And there are multiple features we're focusing on. One is that they prepare children for global life, both in exposing them and teaching them about languages and cultures throughout their years with us. Second, we are pushing the boundaries of what we call personalization in education, particularly with advanced advising systems. And then we want the school itself to be, if you will, an art and design lesson every day. And all of these campuses are being designed by Renzo Piano of Italy, who did the Shard in London, the Pompidou Center in Paris, the Whitney in New York. And so we're pleased to be a part of this event and thank the Washington Post for all their cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Now I'd like to welcome the Washington Post's Eugene Scott. He's going to lead our first discussion. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Eugene Scott. I'm a political reporter for The Fix. I write about political analysis related to identity politics. But for most of my career, I've been an education reporter, so I'm really excited about today's panel. We have with us Ruslan Ali. She is CEO and co-founder of the XQ Institute, which is an organization that works with high schools across the country, providing a nonprofit network of educators, students, and community leaders, with the goal of better preparing these students for college, career, and life. Ruslan is also the managing director of education at the Emerson Collective, a social change organization founded by Laureen Powell Jobs, focused on education, immigration reform, and other issues. Welcome to the Post.
Thank you.
So before we begin, I want to tell all of you here and those watching online that you can join the program by tweeting your questions and using the hashtag post live. I will certainly try to get your questions in and not only ask questions that I want to hear, but let's get started. So just to give people some background who aren't familiar with the XQ Institute, what would you say XQ Institute is, and what are super schools?
XQ is trying to help transform every high school in this country.
Okay.
High school, if there is one place across the education system that has been pervasively stuck, it is high school transformation. And the data bear that out. While we have seen great progress, especially since 2000, in the elementary and the middle grades, we've been stuck for the last 30 years, where achievement has been flat since the late 80s in both reading and mathematics for high school students. We know that about 1 in 3 students, those that do graduate, aren't college ready, but yet super majority, 95% of kids across all demographics, as they enter high school, are desperate and want to go to college, right? We hope to spur action in communities. Eugene, you've been, as you said, writing about this for a very long time. You know better than most that we have had a set of fits and starts across the education system. Again, particularly in the early grades, but we'll get momentum for transformation and then get stuck. In part, our experience tells us that's because community, the stakeholders, most dependent on public education for their learning, are not agents of the change that is being done to them. XQ set about hoping to empower communities everywhere to spur and reimagine what the next high school would look like. As Lorene and I went into this, we thought up to 5, maybe if there were 5, there were 5 communities that we could help empower to dream big and different. What we didn't expect is there would be 10,000 people across the country that participated in what became a 7-month designer of learning process.
Now, are these the super schools?
These are the super schools. What we didn't expect is even after we identified the first 10, 150 teams would continue. So we are up to 19 now.
Okay.
The lessons are coming through. The experiences of what works and what doesn't are becoming ever more clear. But listen, we could help spur 1,000 and that wouldn't be enough. We're delighted to partner with districts like Tulsa and states like Rhode Island. I had the opportunity of just coming back from Puerto Rico, where folks are dealing with a crisis in their schools, the likes of which citizens in our country haven't seen in a very long time. So we're working with communities everywhere to spur this transformation.
So what makes a school a super school? Like, if there are 3 things that distinguish a super school, I guess, from all schools, I guess, are super to some degree, but how would you define a super school?
Well, listen, we are, and one of the key lessons from those 19, approach agnostic. There is absolutely no one size that fits all. Each of these schools is centered around a set of core design principles, ranging from a much deeper vision of student success, where students are deeply entrenched in real-world learning experiences, breakthrough uses of space and time. Grand Rapids comes to mind. It's a school housed in a museum. Its curriculum is based on 250,000 cultural and historical artifacts. Rise, that serves in Los Angeles, that serves mostly foster and homeless young people, has schools in multiple facilities, is teaching in multiple facilities and doing school on wheels. Again, there's no one size fits all here. They're doing breakthrough uses of time. One that comes to mind, Purdue Polytechnic, where at the end of those 4 years, young people are guaranteed admission to Purdue Polytechnic University. There, the educators are in a very nimble way innovating with, as all 19, equity at its center, realizing that to really empower young people to have control over their scheduling, to do personalized learning with technology done right, they had to borrow a hairdressing application so that students could schedule those 30-minute and 15-minute intervals with teachers as they needed them.
So a super school looks different depending on the community and the student body population and the interests of the students. But are you seeing any one particular theme across the board emerge as the biggest challenge to public high schools in this country?
The fact that they have been stuck. We are still, by and large, educating students at the high school level the way that we have done in over 100 years. 6 hours a day in chunks of time, divided into blocks over 8 or 9 periods a day, every day for 4 years. That seat time given to us equal a kind of learning. Every other industry has outpaced our high schools. They look virtually the same. So their lack of innovation, and not unique to high schools, but certainly we feel them the most in high schools, the pervasive inequities that have riddled our system for far too long. The students that are most dependent on their public education for learning get the least. One study recently showed that 60% of high poverty high schools don't even offer physics at a time when knowledge is currency. And it is only through knowing more and mastering more content at the end of high schools that we will truly be future ready and ready for the future of work.
And I know you worked on a lot of these issues during the Obama administration with the U.S. Department of Education. Are there any approaches to this issue that you see this current administration tackling in a way that you think is effective?
I think ensuring that leadership is empowered in their efforts at local use of resources and flexibility can be helpful when done right. Having said that, to roll back everything that now research has said makes a difference is shameful. The last administration was the first to say under Title IX, to identify a truth woven through the spirit of our democracy under Title IX, that students ought to be free from sexual violence in our schools. As Assistant Secretary of Civil Rights under Obama and Duncan for the first term, I never met a faculty member anywhere that said they wanted rape on their campus. Instead, they wanted advice and help on how to cure a pandemic. We were the first administration to identify that gender identity equals gender under Title IX, to roll that back at a time of enlightenment. Seems counterproductive at best. The civil rights data collection hadn't been transformed since 1968. Under Obama's first term, we were able to ask basic questions that showed we absolutely had a school to prison pipeline to erase those data, to throw away the truth about course access, the truth about where dollars are going, the truth about who has access to our strongest teachers, to throw away the thermometer because it says we have a pervasive fever is ignorant. But we remain ever hopeful that these issues, that public education is the great equalizer, that if there is one place of bipartisan agreement, it ought to be in the enforcement of equity and access for all of our young people, and that this new Congress will continue to remind us of that.
And speaking of that, you mentioned LA earlier. We've seen congressional lawmakers from Southern California express their concerns about the LA teacher strike, issues about privatization and equity in public schools in Southern California. I know you obviously work in California quite a bit with your schools. What's been your reaction to that issue? I'm assuming you've been following it pretty closely.
I don't know the specifics of the collective bargaining negotiations in Los Angeles Unified. It is a cry for help from educators that are struggling to do more with less. And we as a country and as a people need to unite around them. Having said that, it is with a heavy heart that you see kids not learning, especially those young people that need their teachers and their schools open the most.
Speaking of issues that you're seeing in schools, in addition to not learning, in covering politics, I've read quite a bit about how kids are really struggling to process some of these larger conversations that are happening at the national level related to sexual assault and identity changes, related to immigration, related to police brutality. What role can schools play in helping students better process these issues we're discussing on a daily basis?
It's not just what they can play, it's what they have to. Listen, whether it be, it's one of the hallmarks of the Obama administration's Office for Civil Rights, its guidances were written with application sections, real advice and counsel on how you deal with these issues, how to help bus drivers have conversations that are grown-up conversations, right? How to help process what's happening around them and yet still feel safe. For sure, how to identify fallacious facts, to be able to know what is true, to know that they have a right. The Obama administration also reminded the country of Plyler versus Doe, that all young people, regardless of whether they are documented or not, have a right to go to and access public education in this country. Teachers and educators, as we were just saying, faculty are dealing with issues that they've never had to before. I was talking with a leader of a school in Brooklyn not too long ago who was sharing the story of a ninth grade student who wears a hijab and a burqa coming to school being threatened, not just because of her ethnicity, but because of her sex, confronting fears. Schools are safe havens. They should be. Having said that, right after 2016, we were down with one of our partner schools in Southern California, helping them figure out how to get swastikas off their walls.
Now, when you think of these issues in the context of where we are now politically, looking at 2020, what are some of the topics and focuses you would like to see this next group of candidates focus on related to public education to perhaps reverse some of these things that you're fearing could become the new norm?
Listen, there are supporting the notion of alignment to college. High schools are the future of work. Ensuring that our young people, when they graduate, can be ready for college and career. Even if they're not, listen, 11.6 million new jobs have been added to the economy since 2008. 11.5 million of them have required a college degree. So we need to prepare young people for access. We could do a fund to support states in that alignment. We could make Pell Grants accessible for high school students that are doing middle college or college preparatory programs. We have to enforce the nation's civil rights laws. This Congress should use its oversight authority and its legislative authority if necessary. Doing something around teacher preparation, supporting teachers, a $10,000 annual permanent tax credit if you are capable and ready and excellent to teach in our nation's high-poverty schools. These are
the Democrats can do now?
We can do now.
Okay.
We can do now. Ensuring that the teacher accountability for teacher effectiveness is back in teacher preparation programs. Ensuring that civil rights protections are a part of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act implementation that was codified into law in the last administration. These are things we can do now.
Have you heard any new ideas coming out of this new Congress so far from any lawmakers that you're excited about, that that you maybe hadn't thought about before, or you feel like are the next step in some of the ideas you worked on previously?
As you mentioned in your last question, a focus on criminal justice and equity is admirable. This idea of an infrastructure conversation, I'm hearing grumblings that if true, we're talking about $100 billion for school construction. We haven't seen anything like that since the New Deal. But if schools were really hubs of community, one of our partner schools in Memphis, Tennessee, Crosstown, is in the old Sears Roebuck's Distribution Center in the middle of the Crosstown Concourse. Its theory is diversity by design. It's surrounded by 35 businesses, including a hospital serving 70,000 residents. If we thought about school construction in that way, one of our partner schools in Endicott, New York, the home of used to be IBM, that is partnering with businesses to not just develop curriculum, but also ensure apprenticeship programs. If we thought about school construction in new ways, we could have not only at once a New Deal, but really revolutionize once again. We were the first, Eugene, as you know, on the planet to do universal high school education. We can once again lead the planet on innovation with an equity mindset when it comes to our schools. So there is certainly some conversations that give me hope, and we look forward to supporting those willing to do the right thing.
Well, obviously, when talking about innovation, we often think about technology. Is there a specific thing happening right now in public education in the area of technology that you believe will be transformative?
That it has finally caught up with the policy. There is no silver bullet. There is no one device. There is no one piece of software. There is no one platform. But finally, a vision for transform policy can be done because technology will make access and opportunity easier and better. Teachers can see what's happening to young people in real time. We can do personalized learning and catch kids before they slip. We don't have to wait for an end-of-year test. Psychometrically valid assessments on daily playlists that meet students where they are, adaptive assessments that will not just identify when young people do something wrong, but exactly the problem that they know. It's not just that math problem they're not doing. We know now they're not just at a 4th grade reading level or an 8th grade reading level. We will know that it's numeracy. We will know that it's fractions. We will be able to, with a laser focus, tackle and identify interventions when needed. We know that we can get teachers to the students that need them the most through serious coaching, through technology, right? It facilitates not only the way teachers do business, but the way students learn.
Awesome. Before I get to a question we have, you talked about catching students before they slip, and I know much of XQ's focus is on high schools. What happens when a student has clearly slipped before high school? How do you get them back on track?
Well, listen, for far too long in our public education, so we've believed that high schools are too late, that it was just too late. That's why we haven't focused. When I tell you that we've improved by an entire year's worth of learning between 4th graders today and 4th graders in 2000 in reading, 2 years worth of learning with 8th graders today versus their counterparts in 2000 in mathematics. That is because we focus relentlessly on that as a country. But finally, we have neuroscience data that shows us that high schools are not too late. We now know that the plasticity of the brain, in fact, there is high school secondary rapid improvement at the secondary level rivals only that pre-K through 5. Right? Neuroscience data is telling us that now. We can actually know that with the right stimulation, you can actually even improve the IQ of high school students. So we know what is possible now. We can debunk the myths of what is not, and we can get the learning to kids that need them in innovative real-world ways.
Awesome, awesome. Unfortunately, as I perhaps gave you a warning, I was not able to get to these questions because I had too many of my own. But your Twitter handle, your website, how can people learn more about you?
Okay, I'm really getting better at Twitter. It's at Rustlin Alley.
Okay.
That's really creative.
All right.
But my name has 2 N's in it because my father was really creative. And our Rethink High School, hashtag Rethink High School, we are at xqinstitute.org. And all of our information is on our website, and we always get back to you in really real time.
Great.
Rustlin at xqinstitute.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Eugene.
Thanks for having us.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Karen Tumulty, and I am a columnist here at the Washington Post. And we are very pleased and very honored to have such a great panel of educators and beyond educators with us today to talk about innovation and also the sort of the intersection of government and education. And so here we have, to my far left, the president of Bates College, Clayton Spencer, Dr. Wayne Frederick, the president of Howard University, and when he says doctor, it's not PhD doctor, it's doctor. And Donna Shalala, who has been the chancellor or president of 3 major universities, Hunter College, the University of Wisconsin, and the University in Miami. And is now probably the most overqualified freshman congresswoman in history, having been HHS secretary as well. And so Congresswoman Shalala, I've got to sort of get off our main topic here and just get to the news. How do we get out of this shutdown?
Yep. Those 3 university presidencies don't qualify me to answer that question. Let me say a couple of things. First of all, Bill Clinton said that I was the most qualified person to serve in Congress since John Quincy Adams. Grown-ups have to step up, particularly on the Senate side, and say enough is enough. As you know, during the shutdown that we had during the Clinton administration, where the whole government was shut down, it was Bob Dole, Senator Dole, the majority leader, who stepped up and said enough is enough. Everybody's going back to work. This is tragic. And what scares me is that we're using policy differences to hurt people, to close down the government. And I don't know of any country in the world that when they have policy differences, they close down the government. I couldn't think of one, and I looked as far as I could. We need rules that prevent this kind of thing, perhaps a continuing resolution that automatically cuts in when you can't agree. But we cannot go through this again, ever again. It is going to end. At some point, the Senate will step up. Right now, the Senate has said very clearly that they will not do anything the president won't sign. So what we did in the House, now that we have the majority, is we passed all the Senate appropriations bills. We didn't pass the House appropriations bills. We took their bills that they passed last year, and we passed them word for word and sent them over to the Senate. So there would be no disagreement between us about what it would take to open up the government and to start negotiations about a smart strategy for to protect our borders, because we believe in that. So it's, at the end of the day, it's going to have to be the Senate.
And well, So what should Speaker Pelosi be doing right now?
Well, right now she's doing what she can do. She's trying to put pressure. She's trying to make it very clear what the outlines of a deal we think would be reasonable. She's reassuring the public that we're in favor of strong borders. And she's saying to the Senate leadership, we're ready to go.
Well, first of all, the other thing I should have mentioned is that we really do want you to be part of our conversation. So if you have any questions, please send them to me. They will get to me here with #postlive. So, Dr. Frederick, I'd like to sort of...
You want to answer that question?
I was going to say, I'm definitely not qualified to answer that.
Well,
I slept at a Holiday Inn last night, though. So.
Right. But so, you know, the very first official visit to a campus that Betsy DeVos did when she became Education Secretary was to Howard. And you took some criticism, I think, on your own campus. And by the way, props to you for, you know, allowing sort of free expression on campuses, because you have been amazing in doing that at Howard. But so you took some flack for Betsy DeVos coming to campus. About a month later, you are in the White House with a bunch of other historically Black college leaders meeting with the president. It is there, I think, that Betsy DeVos famously referred to HBCUs as being pioneers of school choice. So you, again, took a lot of flack for reaching out to the Trump administration. How's that relationship going now?
You know, so a couple of things, I think, just to explain that particular circumstance. So, you know, Betsy DeVos is the Secretary of Education. Every Secretary of Education is an ex officio member of Howard's board. Howard was founded and started with a charter by Congress signed by the 17th President of the United States, President Johnson. So with that in mind, the Secretary of Education often, the Secretaries of Education often invite themselves to the campus or are invited by us, and we obviously want them on the campus. I think that's a good thing. She was confirmed at 12 o'clock on a Tuesday, and I got a call that she wanted to speak to me at 4:30 p.m. that afternoon, and she informed me that she wanted to come on Thursday morning. So very quick turnaround. She did want to come to our campus as the first visit, and you know, I think it was the right thing to do. I've had a lot of interaction with her since then. I would do a couple of things differently, one of which is probably consult with a broader swath of the campus, especially students in particular, to also educate them about why I think it was important. I've had a lot of interaction with her. I think she's been a good listener. I do disagree with some of the policies, but even in those circumstances, she has not been shut off to, you know, getting feedback on what's going on. On the, I think just to explain on the president's side, if you look at that picture very carefully, you would notice that I'm not in the picture. It was a photo op, and I felt strongly about the fact that we shouldn't really participate in a photo op. However, all of the senior administrators who advised the president met with the historically Black colleges and universities, and that in and of itself was historic and unprecedented. I have been in Howard's administration the entire time that President Obama was you know, in office, and we've enjoyed a very good relationship as well, but I don't think as a group the historically Black colleges and universities had necessarily that access and that opportunity to talk. And the last thing I would say is the situation that we find ourselves in is very difficult. The 105 HBCUs right now are under a significant pressure, and every year that I have been president, 1 or 2 have closed. And I don't see that happening unabated unless something dramatically changes. And we're still, although we represent only 4% of the higher ed institutions in this country, we're still responsible for 35% of the African Americans who get bachelor's degrees in STEM disciplines. So the outsized role that we play in terms of diversifying the workforce in this country has really been neglected for some time. And so you know, it's one of those situations where I think you're trying to make sure that you have access and you can get the assistance you need and make the case wherever that is. And I think like our civil rights leaders, we want to be at the table. You know, Martin Luther King would go to the White House even though he probably did not think it was welcoming. And what I think we have to do is to get to the table, look at the menu, probably push the plate back in if we don't like what we see, but at least we could come back out and tell our constituents, you know, what they're serving isn't, you know, what we need, and make an argument to get them to serve something different. So I think we have to continue some type of dialogue.
And you really do honestly feel like there is an open line of communication between you and Betsy DeVos and this administration?
In the Department of Education and with the Secretary, I have to say yes, absolutely. And that has been refreshing. Now, with Secretary Duncan, we also had good access as well. Let me just be clear about that as well. But it's definitely not a closed-off circumstance. I have the opportunity to make my case around my federal appropriation and several other things as well.
So President Clayton, one of the things we really want to talk about, President Spencer, what am I saying here? This is what you get for having two last names.
Right.
Sorry. Spencer. You know, we're talking about cutting-edge innovation in colleges, and there is a phrase that you have often used, purposeful work. And as the mother of a senior at a liberal arts college, I hear the work part and I immediately think, oh, jobs. But there's something that you said that I read that struck me, that this is much more than finding a job. You said work is really fundamental to who you are and who you will become. Could you talk a little, what exactly does purposeful work mean?
So purposeful work first is now a program at Bates.
Where you teach even things like being a doula, right?
We don't teach that. It's not, I mean, Bates is a very classic liberal arts college, but we recognize and embrace the fact that college has always been about preparing students for life and work. And we shouldn't be prissy about that and assume that you teach them a liberal arts education, you claim they learn critical thinking, collaboration, creativity. They do learn all those things. And then just tell them, good luck. It's a huge investment for families. It's a huge investment for students themselves of their talent and their financial investment. And they need to know how to animate what they learn in the liberal arts to be effective actors in the world. And college has always been about that. So on one hand, this is innovative. On the other hand, it's deeply what college and the liberal arts education has always been about. So the terms, why do we pick those terms? So number one, it's based on the thought that everyone in life is looking for a life that has meaning and that allows them to act in the world in a way that brings them meaning. And work can be, it can be for money or not. It can be in the home, it can be in the workplace, et cetera. The important thing to know about purposeful work is it's not a kind of work. Purpose does not end here. It's not do-gooder work. You can want to be a forest ranger, a ballet dancer, work for J.P. Morgan. You can do whatever you want. It's what aligns what your values are, what your interests are, with how you act in the world. So what we're doing with our students is helping them understand that it's that alignment they're after. How do they start to take courses that they're actually interested in? Don't run to economics because they think that's a proxy for getting a job if they don't have any interest in economics. So take that philosophy course and begin to understand your interests. And then we have a curricular dimensions that are infused in the liberal arts, and we also have a very practical internship program. I won't go into all of that now, but the purpose piece is what emerges. It's the alignment between your interests, what you do, what you learn to do well, and then how you act in the world. And the notion that you have a passion and then you have to go impose that on the world or let it out. I mean, if you're Yo-Yo Ma or Leonardo da Vinci, that probably works. But for most people, passion is a byproduct of doing things and achieving mastery. So we work with students in very intentional ways to do that. We can come back to talk more about that.
Right, it's less what you want to be when you grow up than who you want to be when you grow up, I guess.
And it's also the intel inside. These kids are going to have 7, 8, 9 jobs, and we've always said that the liberal arts is the most powerful and adaptable kind of education there is. But then you need to make sure our students are aware of it and they use it as they move through the world and keep relearning and adapting. That's what it's going to take in this global, high-velocity change economy.
So, Dr. Frederick, Howard has more of its students applying, more African Americans applying to med school from Howard than any other university. And you know, one of the things I think that distinguishes Howard is that you have a major medical institution right there that is really part of the core of the university's mission. But even with those numbers, as impressive as they are, we're still looking, proportionally, they're not where they should be. Well, how do we change that? Is this something that, I mean, is this STEM education in the early years? Is there something that colleges should be doing to better prepare African Americans and other minorities to go into the medical field, or what?
Sure, so it's multifactorial, and I think we have to have a pluripotent approach to fixing it. And just to put it in context, the country has a crisis, in my opinion. When you look at healthcare disparities and you look at outcomes for African Americans, they're drastically well below the outcomes for the majority populations. And so that has a lot of impact on the communities that people live in. It has a lot of impact, I think, on the overall productivity of the country. And so I think everyone needs to be involved. In 1978, there were more African American males in this country who applied to medical school than in 2014. Just think of the difference of what this country was in that 40-year span, and yet still, we are at a place where you have less African-American males even applying to medical school. And you're right, Howard sends more African-American applicants to medical school than any other institution in the country, which again is worrisome, because when you look at Howard University as a private institution with 9,400 students and an endowment of $780 million, that is an outsized burden to have a private institution in the nation's capital doing that. So how do we fix that? And pipeline is an issue. We have a middle school on our campus focused on math and science. I think that's one of the solutions. We have to infuse the idea of college early. If you stop one of my middle school students on campus and or on the sidewalk catching the bus and you ask them where they go to school, they'll tell you, I go to Howard University. They won't say, I go to Howard University's middle school. Mm-hmm. And so they already have that form that, listen, this is normal, I'm going to be back here or on another campus like this, and I think we have to push that. With respect to STEM education, and of course there's a lot of conversation in this country, we also have to recognize the gender gaps. I'm the proud father of a 14-year-old son and a 12-year-old daughter. My 12-year-old daughter is very good at math. She would not join the math club despite being coaxed by several teachers. And when I went to speak to her about it, she basically said, listen, I don't like working with boys because they take over stuff, they mess it up, and then we have to fix it. And so I think, again, at a very early age, we also don't recognize how much our education system really takes an off-ramp for many students because of gender and all these other issues as well. So I think we really have to look at our middle school, we have to look at the pipeline. And then the last thing I would say is we have to invest as a country, both government and private, in making sure that we take away the barriers for those students' success. If you look at Silicon Valley and the numbers, they're very low. When I became the president, I approached Google and I said, listen, you guys come up with every reason why you don't hire my folks. You send a Google in residence professor to my campus. I said, let's try something different. I want a Howard West. I want my students to come out here, and instead of you complain about them not being able to code, you co-teach them with my faculty. That does two things. You can't complain that they're not prepared because you're responsible for teaching them. The second thing is they're getting a contemporary education, and the faculty now can come back and change their curriculum so that it is as cutting edge as possible. They've now hired at least 6 of our students from that first cohort of 26, and they've hired another 5 in the Silicon Valley area. And now we've expanded that program, so it's all year round, fall and spring. And I think innovations like that to break down these barriers are going to be very necessary as we move forward.
Well, and of course, education and healthcare is your two wheelhouses colliding here. I remember at one point talking to you during the healthcare reform efforts that led to the Affordable Care Act, and you were very passionate, for instance, about the role that nurses should play. So we've talked about sort of preparing students to live up to their potential, but how should we be rethinking education to be turning out the kinds of skills and professionals that we need, especially now that we do have a healthcare system that doesn't look like it used to?
Well, I'm not, you know, in nursing, there's a 4-year program, and we've actually transformed nursing as part of the report that I chaired for the Institute of Medicine, where you have to get a 4-year degree, really, to get a job, and an advanced degree if you really want to practice with a broader sweep. But it's not just nursing. When I think about that kind of preparation, I'm very wary about doing it. In some professions, you do it, like nursing. I'm very wary about doing it all at the undergraduate level. I always have been. And so I've always worked with institutions, even when they wanted to do undergraduate business schools, to make sure they had the liberal arts, because frankly, we don't know what they need to know 10 years from now. But here's what I do know. At the University of Miami, we started the Launchpad. This gives an opportunity for any student, not just in business or engineering, to start a business. So we have these serial freshman entrepreneurs. We want every student at the university to think about creating a job, not just about taking a job. That requires a different kind of thinking. You walk into the Launchpad, which is in the Student Center, and you present your idea, and they'll help you put together a business plan. So it's the largest activity at the University of Miami. The vast majority of the students that walk in there and start businesses come from the arts and sciences. Yeah. And not as much, not engineering or business, but they're English majors and theater majors. They just have a good idea. And we've created hundreds of businesses over the years because of that. But it's a different way of educating students, and it's understanding that it's not just the classroom activity. Lots of people have entrepreneurships in their business school, but it's a different way of getting the kids to think in a fresh way. Look, I was in junior achievement as a kid, and I created 4 or 5 businesses, shaped the way I think about American business.
So, President Spitzer, how do you look at this sort of getting students, especially in the liberal arts, to sort of think kind of creatively and entrepreneurially, but also to make sure you still do have those sets of practical skills that are going to turn your idea into something that's real?
So one of the ways we do it at Bates, we have a short term at the end of our 2 regular semesters. That's about, if it's 5 weeks, you take 1 course that's intensive. And we have brought in, this is a new innovation, brought in practitioners to teach those courses. So we have graphic designers, music producers, filmmakers, entrepreneurship, a business competition, all of those things that are in this kind of more experimental zone of that one month. While during the regular semester, they're being history, philosophy, economics majors, they're learning critical thinking, research, review. So that's one of the important ways we do it. The other way is through a really well-designed internship program, and I'd like to reference what Dr. Frederick said. We have, one of the animating principles of purposeful work is that we need to fill our equity promise to students. So long ago, American higher education began reaching out more broadly, bringing in more students, creating more diverse student bodies. Then it occurred to us about in the 90s that we better support them for academic success. But then if you're just relying on kids to use mom and dad and their professional networks to get an internship, you are leaving all this fantastic talent on the table. So one of the animating features of purposeful work is what I call the 3rd leg of the equity promise. We let you in, we help you succeed, and then we're going to help you bridge to the world of work. And we have We spend $350,000 a year supporting students in internships. We have a set of core employers like the Google model where there's a pre-existing relationship between us, and we work very hard to make sure that our students of color, first-gen students, are overrepresented in those cohorts.
You know, you're talking to university people, though, from fairly elite institutions. We've got to remember we need also to provide apprenticeships and alternative ways of getting into the workforce. And those kinds of investments we're just starting to make and just starting to think about. I had a cousin that spent 2 years in college. He was a brilliant student. He hated it. Came to me and said, I think I can get an apprenticeship as an electrician. And he did. Took 6 years. It was a long apprenticeship. Wow. He's making a lot of money now and is very happy and is very passionate about what he's doing. But he's also a great reader because he spent a couple of years in college. But we need alternative tracks as well, but what we don't need to do is to funnel minority students into those. We still have a fundamental equity problem in this country, and all of us are working on that.
Right. Well, if we just have a little bit of time left, and I wanted to ask one question that I think is top of mind to everyone who has a student, whether they're a kindergartner or in post-grad, and you coming from Florida, what should we be doing to make our schools safer?
Oh, my heavens. We can start by identifying early on young people who have real challenges. And I mean by that intervening early on. If you look at what the Scandinavian countries do, they'll identify a child that may have behavioral problems in kindergarten or in the first grade, and then they'll assign someone that sticks with them and their family, working with them right through. If you look at Parkland, at every stage of that man's life, a teacher tried to intervene to get him into some kind of services, but there were no seamless services. And so it was hit and miss, and at the end of the day, we got a seriously deranged human being who caused unbelievable damage. So mental health is one piece. We've got to get rid of the guns. Yeah. No other country on earth has assault weapons, doesn't have background checks, makes it easy to buy a gun. So we're going to do a background check bill on the House side, and I'm sure that we're going to pass it. I hope we get back to the assault weapons ban. I helped negotiate that in '94, and we banned assault weapons, but we just have too many guns. We do not need to get rid of the Second Amendment. We can simultaneously manage and reduce the number of guns and who has access to guns and not mess around with hunters.
And you come from a school in an urban setting, you come from a school not in, what keeps you awake at night on this question of school safety?
So I think we all have to be smart about the active shooter scenario, the natural disaster scenarios that are just happening with greater frequency. I worry about that stuff, and we drill for it. You can, I think, never be prepared, but we spend a lot of time on a variety of risk management topics.
So I'm going to go in a completely different direction because they have covered exactly what I would have said if I went first. So I'm going to tell you something totally different. I think that one of the things that we do not do, and we've become very shy and apprehensive about talking about, is our humanity. We are almost hesitant to bring up the issue of being nice, of intervening and giving some humanness to what we do, and that worries me. So the students who come, they're bright, they're ambitious, they can create jobs, but I still think our education system is a key part of where we need to stop and say there is a high price and value to being nice to someone. And the reason
come up to Congress.
And the reason why I double down on that is in the social media age, we hide behind our devices and say things, right? We have a country now that has normalized tweeting, which obviously, the president does, but we've all kind of normalized it, and we're doing the same things, and no one is intervening. So as you mentioned, sometimes we see someone having trouble. We don't have good mental health care services. I agree with all that. But who goes out of the way to say, let me be the one to intervene, or let me be the one to just give somebody a kind word on that day that probably makes a difference?
You know, I can't think of a better way to close than just reminding people that decency is something that we need to be instilling in our young people as well. So thank you all very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Well, hello. I'm Josh White. I'm the America Desk editor here at the Washington Post, and I'm a former education editor here as well. I'm delighted to have on stage with me today Ryan Craig, co-founder of University Ventures, an investment firm that focuses on global higher education and creating new pathways from education to employment. Also, Dr. Bob McMahon, president of Kettering University in Flint, Michigan, an experiential learning-based school with a focus on STEM and business fields. And Dr. Sanjay Rai, Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs at Montgomery College, a top community college right here in Maryland that serves about 60,000 students each year. Well, it's a new record. Just about 1/3 of adults in the United States have a traditional four-year college degree, which means there are a lot of people who don't. And many of those graduates are not prepared to go directly into a specific job. Many of them are underemployed, and many of them are saddled with a lot of debt. Our discussion today is going to focus on how we're preparing the next generation of students for the jobs of tomorrow. Before we begin, I want to remind the audience you can tweet your questions using the hashtag #PostLive. I want to start with Mr. Craig. There's a problem. There's also a lot of possibilities. What do you see as the biggest problem here, and what are the chances of success?
Well, what gets most of the attention around higher education is the crisis of affordability. You can't miss it every week on the front page somewhere. The student loan debt, now $1.5 trillion, about $40,000 per college graduate. So it's a lot. But the fact of the matter is that if every graduate were entering into a $60,000 a year starting salary job, we wouldn't have a problem. So it's the combination of affordability and employability. And over the last decade, we've seen a real crisis in employability. Underemployment amongst college graduates is now north of 40%. And a big reason for that is the digitization of the economy, and both in substance as well as in terms of form, because it's changed hiring. And college graduates just simply aren't being prepared for the entry-level jobs that employers are looking to fill. So it's a major problem.
But there are pathways to success. Dr. McMahon, you've looked at your university has for a very long time focused on this issue of employability. Can you talk a bit about what your university does, how it does it, and why it has been successful?
Be delighted. It's actually a very interesting story in American higher education. We're celebrating our centennial this year. So we were founded 100 years ago. And the centennial motto that we have, I think, is really very appropriate. It's the future of education built a century ago. Because in a lot of ways, we actually represent in practice what a lot of institutions and a lot of higher ed, a lot of conversation in higher ed is outlines as aspirational goals for how you integrate theory and practice in education. At our institution, students, first off, we have no summer holidays. We go 12 months a year. The curriculum is 4.5 years long. The students, when they join, they're split into two cohorts that go into a 12-week on, 12-week off rotation from their freshman year. And they spend 12 weeks in an intense academic curriculum and then 12 weeks in a professional placement in industry or in government or in laboratories that complements their professional goals and why they are the degree that they're seeking. So these professional placements are cooperative placements, but they're not observational. They become employees of the organization. They have the same expectations and demands placed upon them as any other employee. They have the benefits that a typical employee does, et cetera. So over the course of their 4.5 years, they advance in their corporate roles as they advance in their academic abilities. And this creates a virtuous circle that is really unprecedented in American higher education because it creates the whole individual. I like to say our employability of our students, the placement rate of our students, vacillates wildly between 99 and 100% every year. And I'd underscore the point you just made. We have one of the lowest debt default rates of any institution in the United States because when our students leave, it's that combination of cost and the ability to address the debt that is at the centerpiece of a lot of the affordability
I'll
issues.
just add that I think that is fairly unique. The vast majority of colleges and universities, their interface to the job market, to the world of employers, the big bad world of employers, is career services. And that's one office out of dozens that is often located on the periphery of campus, typically not open on the evenings or weekends when students have the most time. Only about 50% of students in bachelor's degree programs even partake of career services. And when they do walk in, they're likely to meet someone who's worked their whole career in career services as opposed to in the industry they're trying to get into. So that would be great if we were all trying to get jobs in career services, but it doesn't work like that. So colleges and universities don't see as their responsibility to get their students jobs. They continue to spout the old, in my view, tired line that we prepare you for your 5th job, not your 1st job. Students today know that if they don't get a good 1st job, they're probably not going to get a good 5th job in today's economy.
And Dr. Raya, at Montgomery College, that is one of the things that you're trying to address, the skills gap and that 1st job. Can you talk a little bit about what a community college can do to serve a very large community that is seeking work, success in life, and what programs are most successful and how do you do it?
So thank you for the opportunity, but before I answer your question, when I go to these types of discussion, often we are quick to conclude that there are lots of problems with our higher education system. I want to say this very clearly that U.S. higher education system is still one of the best in the world, and a lot of countries are able to replicate a lot of things that we do very successfully, but in one area they have not succeeded. That is our higher education system. So we still start from a very good place. We still have a very strong system. But we do have a couple of challenges. And we have to understand the root cause of these challenges. And I think globalization, technology, and changing demography of our nation is something that is asking us to do things differently. And I speak from Montgomery College, a community college right outside Washington, D.C., from their perspective. So the idea, these 3 things that I mentioned, that kind of feeds into 3 different areas. Accessibility. Higher education has to be more accessible, more affordable. Cost of higher education is certainly an issue. And the employability is there too. So a 1-year degree at Montgomery College will cost about $6,000. So affordability is important. We are in Montgomery County. We have 3 campuses, several workforce development sites. We are accessible. Then we are accessible through technology. We have a strong online program. Then we are academically accessible too. If someone is not college ready, you need you have some gaps in some math, English, those types of things. We do that very well. And other 1,300 or so community colleges across the nation do that very well. The challenges that higher education system faces today, our community colleges are doing that quite well. Now, coming back to this skill gap issue, what we do at Montgomery College, our economy is high-tech economy, biotechnology economy. So we work very closely with the industries, and we create programs on the credit side and also on the non-credit side. So if you are an underemployed or unemployed IT worker, you can come to Montgomery College and you can enter into our cybersecurity program that's offered Tuesday, Thursday evening at a very, very affordable class, $500–600 or so. And there are thousands of cybersecurity jobs that are open in this DC, Virginia, Maryland area. So we provide our companies talented workforce. At the same time, people who are underemployed, unemployed, they get opportunities to do that. Biotechnology is the same area. In our credit program, about half of our students have undergraduate and master's degrees, often in life sciences, but they don't have the skills to be employed in the biotechnology industries that we have in the life sciences corridor in this area. So, so we create programs again in the same way, working very closely with the industries in those areas. So there are several. Then data analysis. Big data is another huge opportunities, especially in the intersection of IT and data science. A lot of new tools are being developed. So that's where lots of opportunities are there. And there's no other country that's ahead of us in these types of things. I think that we have a premier higher education system, and the community college system is uniquely American. And we need to start look at our strength and develop those systems further.
Now, Dr. McMahon, one of the things that your university is working on is experiential learning. You have an autonomous vehicle program, crash test facility, labs, that sort of. Can you talk a little bit about those programs? Why specifically focus on an individual technology or something like the autonomous vehicles? What do the students get out of that?
They get the world out of it. And the reason that I say that is that the university was actually founded on a different idea, and that is that in order to educate the whole person, that you have to create an equivalence. If you look at how we typically treat experiential learning in the United States, it is always integrated into our educational system in a way that is subordinate to the classroom experience. That says, we have this university or this program, and we're going to add an experiential component to it. We're actually not going to change the way that we deliver what we deliver in the classroom. Okay. We're just going to tack this thing on and call it a whole. The Kettering model is the opposite. It says that these two things are equal in importance. One is not subordinate to the other. Each informs the other. And so the students spend as much time in the application of the discipline as in the acquisition of the knowledge and support of the discipline. And that creates a virtuous circle that is bidirectional. The students' experience in their cooperative placements or in these other experiential activities informs the classroom. How many universities are out there where a faculty member is teaching abstract concept, Navier-Stokes equation, and is talking about the theory, then turns around and faces the students and says, Sue, now you're working in a wind tunnel lab, in a national lab. You're working in the wind tunnel facility. Do you use this in this way, or do you have some way in which you've adapted this formalism to that particular application? And Sue stands up and says, well, no, we don't really use that. Would you come up here and show us how that works? And then that closure of application and knowledge is it's explosive.
And that's so hard to do. I mean, so much harder than giving the same lecture you've given for the last 20 years in the class, which is why these institutions on the stage here are so exceptional. The reality is that this is a many-to-many problem, right? Mm. You've got millions of employers, you've got thousands of post-secondary institutions. How do you match students and graduates with jobs? right? No single institution, with maybe a couple of exceptions here, is capable of managing the relationships with employers, the number of relationships at the level of depth they need to be managed. And no employer is really interested in doing that. And over the last decade, we've seen the emergence of what we call hiring friction, which is the increased propensity of employers to say, I'm not hiring anyone for this position unless they've demonstrated they can do it, they've already done it effectively. Even for entry-level jobs, we see all kinds of experience requirements now on jobs that should be entry-level. For example, entry-level sales positions, which say we want 3 years of experience with Salesforce.com. Well, that's crazy.
How do you get experience?
Exactly.
Without experience?
How do you get experience with experience? So we're seeing the emergence of these intermediaries that sort of stand between traditional post-secondary education and employers. We call them last mile training intermediaries, bridging that last mile to the employer, typically by training on the digital skills that traditional post-secondary institutions just really aren't very good at training on, because they simply don't have the relationships with employers to understand what technologies employers are actually looking for in these jobs.
So if employers are looking for marketable skills and they're looking for experience, what does that mean for the philosophy major? What does that mean for someone who's studying classical literature or English?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, I just wrote a book that came out last year called Faster and Cheaper Alternatives to College, where I make the argument that there are these new faster and cheaper alternatives, boot camps and apprenticeship models and staffing models that incorporate last mile training that are going to be providing new faster and cheaper pathways to the good first jobs that college graduates are having a hard time getting. Probably not at your institutions, but at lots of institutions.
Even for us, our Department of Liberal Arts is our largest academic department. So even in a STEM-focused curriculum, I mean, one of our big new announcements recently is we opened a comprehensive set of music studios for our students to go in, and they can go in and record. We have bands forming because there's so much energy around the intersection of the arts and engineering and the sciences.
If you can get your students jobs, you can do all kinds of things, and you have room to do all of that. The challenge is that we're seeing too few institutions doing a good job of that. And we believe that in the next 5 to 10 years, millions of students will vote with their feet in favor of faster and cheaper alternatives. And we are not saying that we should have or would benefit from less post-secondary education in aggregate or per capita. That would be economic suicide. But what we are saying is that we should think about a restaging of how we consume that post-secondary education, as we've done everything else in our society. You shouldn't have to do it all you can eat in one sitting. You should be able to get what you need when you need it. And if that means taking a faster and cheaper pathway to a good first job, and then being in that job for a couple of years with no debt, and then looking around and ascertaining what secondary or tertiary pathway you might want in order to move on, move up, develop those cognitive executive function skills you need to be successful in your career, then you should do that. And those pathways will be available. Ultimately, we do need to develop all of those cognitive and humanities skills. And
the community colleges are they're a critical part of that spectrum. We really need to look at this as a spectrum and a kind of a lifelong engagement in this.
Now, you've talked about the concept of placement colleges. Yeah. Talk a little bit about that.
You know, I think that a lot of, and I say this lovingly because my mother actually taught in a community college for 30 years, and so I know community college as well, and I know that many of them are run as academic institutions where the priority remains degree programs and associate degree programs over sort of employer and industry-focused certificate programs. Associate degree programs, for the most part, are stepping stones, transfer colleges to four-year institutions, and some community colleges do that better than others. What we would like to see is a distinct community college system that's really focused on employment and employability rather than an academic model, and that would involve some sort of hybrid of what community colleges do today with their certificate programs and industry focuses, as Montgomery is doing, and what workforce boards are doing.
Dr. Wright, what do you think about that?
I think that's important, but we don't want to do either or. You know, students have to learn how to think critically, and since you brought up philosophy, I'm a student of mathematics and physics. If you look at fundamental questions in philosophy or physics or math, they are not that far away. at Montgomery College and at other community colleges as well. Now, there are a lot of students who go from credit program to non-credit program. You're doing a degree in cybersecurity on the credit side. There are lots of opportunity to take non-credit courses and certifications in networking and other areas. That's happening. Students from non-credit side are going to the credit side. At Montgomery College, a large number of students do that. Why that's important? Because we heard the expression last mile. In knowledge economy, that last mile becomes longer. It's not only a mile. And the model where students go from credit to non-credit, it shortens that last mile thing. So and that can happen only if you understand your economy, you work with your community. So at Montgomery College, for example, health sciences program, a lot of need as we are all aging populations, and we are going to use a lot of healthcare workers because of aging. And a lot of our healthcare workers are from baby boomer generation, so we have to replace them also. So at Montgomery College, we became the first community college in the country to have a hospital right on our campus. That creates a wonderful collaboration between our health sciences program and the hospital. So I think those are the models that Montgomery College and a lot of other community colleges are doing, and doing it very, very successfully. Right. So most of the questions that we read in the literature about issues with higher education is skill gap. In US higher education system, community colleges are already doing those things quite well. The question is, how do we scale that up? And how do we make the entire spectrum of our higher education equally proactive, equally responsive?
Now, if I'm a prospective student and I'm looking for all of these things, I'm looking for marketability, I'm looking for a job, I'm looking for success and a future.
Enroll at Montgomery College.
Or Kettering.
And after you're done, come see us.
How do you decide what's going to be best for you, given these warnings, these concerns, some places that are specializing? How do you evaluate the vast array of opportunities that are out there, given what we know?
Well, the data is not great. Let's start with that. You don't have too many institutions outside of the coding boot camps who are advertising 98% placement rate into $70,000 a year starting salary jobs. But ultimately, I think that is where we're heading. This combination of the crisis of affordability and employability has caused what we call an employment imperative, where 90+% of students consistently now today say that they are enrolling in a post-secondary institution for the purpose of getting a job, and a good first job in particular. So that data needs to be there. Institutions need to take responsibility for helping their students, not only preparing them, but actually helping them into the workforce and getting them good first jobs.
Dr. McMahon, aside from enrolling at Kettering?
Aside from enrolling at Kettering, I think the whole, how I would kind of conclude is this whole, we have to really take a very strong look at this whole notion of skills development as a thing distinct from education, in a sense, because when you talk to not just employers but in graduate schools and professional schools, and you ask them what they're actually looking for in graduates, they can actually articulate this very clearly. They're looking for a set of attributes. They're not as particular about domain knowledge, because they recognize that 3/4 of the stuff, the material, the facts, if you will, that a student learns while they're in school will be obsolete within a year of their graduation. And so they're more likely to say, well, we can teach them what they know when they come to us. What we need is a student who believes, who knows that no matter what they are faced with, they can figure it out, and they've been given the tools and the skills to do it. Students that are resilient, students that know how to operate in organizations, who do not believe, who understand that it's not just about the acquisition of knowledge, but it's also about the application of knowledge and how you work within groups in order to advance. ideas and advance the human condition. Those are the skills that traditional higher education tends to say, well, those are these other things. We're going to focus on the knowledge acquisition, and we'll let that happen at some other indeterminate point. I think that is an artificial distinction, and as the relationship of the consumer to higher education evolves, and it is evolving, the demand is going to be ever more directed at that integration of those skills into the education of the students.
Right. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. I want to thank Dr. Rye, Dr. McMahon, and Mr. Craig for joining us for this very great panel. I'd like to next hand off to my colleague, Nick Anderson, who will be hosting the final panel. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you all for being here, for joining us. My name is Nick Anderson. I'm a higher education reporter here at the Post. I've been writing about universities and colleges for about 7 years now, and I am pleased to be here with two experts from academia who are going to talk with us about technology and globalization in higher education and some of the changes that we see and maybe some of the goals that we might have to open up universities and classrooms to new perspectives. And so right on my left here is Cynthia Miller-Idriss. Cynthia is a sociologist at the American University here in Washington, D.C., and she's also their director of the International Training and Education Program there in the School of Education. Cynthia has a bachelor's from Cornell University and a doctorate from the University of Michigan. She's also recently a co-author of a book that's on this subject called Seeing the World, How U.S. Universities Make Knowledge in a Global Era. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the ideas in that book. And to her left is Thomas Nichols. Tom is a professor of National Security Affairs at the U.S. Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island. He's also on the faculty of the Harvard Extension School, and he is notably also a 5-time Jeopardy champion. He holds a bachelor's degree from Boston University and a doctorate from Georgetown, and he is the recent author of a book that's also somewhat on point to our subject here called The Death of Expertise, The Campaign Against Established Knowledge and Why It Matters. So, thank you, Cynthia and Tom, for being here with us. And I'd like to open up our discussion by, before I go any further, I'm sorry, I want to encourage those of you who are in the audience or watching us online to please tweet to us any questions that you might think that we should have here in the discussion at the hashtag #PostLive, and we'll track those questions and try to work them into our discussion. Now, I would like to begin by talking about technological change as you see it in your classrooms. There has been much made of the idea that classroom instruction is changing and that technology is changing the way professors relate to students. But let's get real specific on the ground. How has your classroom changed, Cynthia? And then we'll get to your experiences, Tom, and we can talk a little bit about the pros and cons of this.
I mean, thank you for having me. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. I would say for my classes, I teach pretty traditional seminar style graduate and undergraduate classes. You know, when I first started teaching 16 years ago, I was still using overhead. I don't know if you remember the overhead projectors, but I was using overhead slides and having to make those. So obviously there's some simple ways like PowerPoint, things that make my life easier with embedded video, with Skype sessions where we can meet the author and have them show up on screen for 15 or 20 minutes and students get to ask them questions. you know, I rarely receive hard copies of papers anymore, mostly submissions online through portals. There are discussion portals that students engage with over the course of the week. And most of their reading materials, except for actual hard copies of books, most of their reading materials are online for them. So, so there's a kind of fluid engagement for them with online materials and with tech in the classroom. But when it comes to actually discussing, I mean, it's face-to-face.
And do you have any distance learning element in your classroom?
Not in my classroom. Although, you know, I have to go to a conference in April, and we will set up a Zoom class for that. So in a pinch, if I'm out of town, a couple of the students from that class will be with me in San Francisco at the conference, and we will gather there, and the rest of the class will Zoom in. And so there are, it's not a hybrid class, but that is a way to not have to make up a class where we can still do content and use the tech to get through that missed class.
And Tom, what about you? What's your experience with how technology has changed the way you interact with students?
Well, first thing I should say is that my views do not represent the Naval War College or the Harvard Extension School. I think one of the interesting ways that technology has changed the educational experience is the impact it has on the students rather than what it has on me. Things like the difficulty, I've been teaching for a little over 30 years. Getting students to walk into a bricks and mortar library is really difficult, and the serendipity of accidental discovery now happens for them online rather than in examining stacks of books. It's a subtle difference, but it's important. Cynthia was talking about getting papers handed in via online. Also, all papers are now, I shouldn't say all, but a lot of the papers are now automatically first drafts because students are not drafting and typing and fixing, they're putting them on a screen, they look good. And I think that's hurt writing and editing skills.
And created more work for you.
I mean, in a sense, you know, having the papers in front of me on a screen creates less work because I find that I type faster than I write. So I put a lot more comments on papers now than I used to when I had to scrawl them with my, you know, dreaded red pen. But I think it's also opened the students to a lot more possibility for information. I mean, I think it's a great thing, for example, and I'm a technophile, so I should probably say that. I mean, I'm not resisting the influence of technology on the student. I'm just concerned about it. I like, for example, the fact that students will not just settle for what's on the syllabus. There is a serendipity of a different kind where they start looking online. Unfortunately, I lose control over that process. And by the way, you took me back with overheads, you know, with overhead slides, and it made me think of that I've been teaching long enough that I used to finish class and then have to wash my hands because they're covered in chalk. And I think that's an improvement because I use embedded video. I use links that are live. Sometimes in the middle of the class, I'll say, oh, there's something I'd really like you to see. And I just pull it up out of this vast repository.
People talk about flipping classrooms. Do you ever flip your classroom? And do you have a distance element?
Well, the Naval War College has its own distance program, and so that's a separate issue. I teach in the resident program. Harvard Extension School, the effect of distance education on what I do there over 15 years has been profound. I think, like Cynthia, we were talking about this earlier. You know, I was initially a skeptic. Now I've come over to that, but also it's just the way the world is now. And there are good and bad aspects to that. I am old-fashioned. I want the students in the classroom with me. I'm a teacher. I want them where I can see them. I want them where I can kind of take their temperature, see their facial expressions. And I find that the distance element adds a real challenge that maybe in some ways makes me a better teacher or makes me a more conscientious teacher, but it really is a level of challenge that I have to overcome.
Well, that's interesting. Now, a lot of people in the higher education world were thinking a few years ago that the distance element through technology was really going to change things, that somehow universities would be democratized and transformed by opening up the world through technology and bringing professors such as yourselves to far-flung places. Do you feel that that promise is still out there, that it's still viable? Are you a fan of that idea or perhaps a skeptic? And let's talk about that.
I would say I'm a fan of the idea. I think it's still largely an unrealized potential, but it's a potential to democratize knowledge, to create access, to create better pathways for equity. You know, we have where I teach in the School of Education, we've had fully online programs only for about 18 months. And we've seen a 200% increase in the master's programs where we have those programs. And I think the latest figures are 26% of US master's level or graduate students are now enrolled in fully online programs. So we have to, even though that may not have changed my teaching that much, may not have changed Tom's teaching all that much, and I think we have to acknowledge that there are large numbers of students who are learning this way, and that and I will say in our school, it has radically, or not radically, but significantly diversified the student population. The online population is more diverse than the traditional population. Mm-hmm. So those statistics, again, is that bearing out nationally? I think that still has to be proven. I think it has the potential for first-generation students, for working parents, for people who are constrained on time, can't physically get to campus, veterans. I think we have whole populations of students for whom online spaces can create more access.
And Tom, you said you're a bit skeptical. Let's talk about MOOCs for a minute now. This notion of massive open online courses. It was free. Now there's some small charges that people pay sometimes, but massive was the idea, and that somehow a professor would reach tens of thousands of people, and that this was going to be a great thing. You're not really on board with that idea.
No.
Why not?
Well, to go back to the conversation you're just having with Cynthia, I think we have to differentiate two things. Well, first, I think the technological optimism was always overblown about this. I mean, I remember when these debates began in the 90s, and I think that sometimes we lose sight of the technology is open-ended. That's going to be great, but we lose sight of the limitations on human beings, that at some point we're running up against the natural limitations of how human beings learn. And the technology can keep getting better, but that's not going to change the way your brain is structured. When it comes to the democratization of education, I mean, MOOCs, the idea was that, again, we'd have the world would be an open university. We need to differentiate between the students who can't get any education at all, who have now been able to reach out. I mean, I first noticed this when I was teaching a course on Cold War history, and distance options made it possible for students in the former Soviet bloc to join my class. They couldn't come to the United States, but suddenly someone says, boy, I live in Poland, and I'm a student here. It's great. It made the class better. And for that student, there is no other way to get there. I think the problem with MOOCs and other distance options is that it puts a huge amount of responsibility on the student to be incredibly disciplined and organized. And I think
students aren't incredibly disciplined and organized.
I'm here to give you some breaking news about students. They are not incredibly disciplined and organized. And I think that promise of, well, we'll just put it all out there and you will all approach it with the diligence that as though you were under the guidance of a professor. I mean, I would think one of the problems, for example, with distance courses is when students say, well, it's online. Yeah. I was going to go to class, but I'll get it online. That's a bad option. And then maybe they don't, or they don't. That a question goes by that they may have wanted to spur the class with. So I think for one group of students, especially people in less developed countries or newly democratized countries, this is great. For students who are going to have to rely on a huge amount of discipline and initiative when it's right there available to them, I think that's actually encouraged some bad habits.
So I want to tap into the knowledge that both of you expressed in your books recently. Cynthia, yours on Seeing the World, How U.S. Universities Make Knowledge in a Global Era. Both of your books seem to me to be at least broadly dealing with a problem you see on the potential limits that we're putting on our knowledge. So talk to me about the lessons you learned from writing that and how they might apply to the universities as you're seeing them.
So one of the things we learned in that book, and this is a book a team of scholars at this, housed at the Social Science Research Council were studying 12 universities over a long period of time. And one of the things we found out in looking at how they organize knowledge about the rest of the world outside of the US, is that the social sciences systematically discourage graduate students from engaging in empirical research overseas.
Really?
And they do that because of their perceptions that the best way to secure a tenure track position is by working on, well, there are lots of different reasons. Sociologists do that because they feel the tenure track positions are better secured through working on domestic issues. The political scientists had other reasons, and the economists were working globally, but with universal models, essentially. But across the board, there was not real deep contextual specialized knowledge the way that I think when Tom was trained, when I was trained, when there was a lot more resources, a lot of funding going into graduate support for training overseas. Those kinds of things were drying up, and faculty were discouraging students from doing it. They were saying the best way to get a job is to work on a domestic issue, and we were surprised, but the data, the interviews were very clear.
So that's really interesting because it raises the question: are universities sort of paying lip service to globalization, but actually not really?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you find is that there's this tension between specialized knowledge and kind of cosmopolitan citizens. And a lot of what the push over the last 10 years in universities has been, the rise in study abroad has been predominantly in short-term study abroad courses, often as short as 1 or 2 weeks. And they can be real learning experiences, but often they're geared more toward creating kind of cosmopolitan citizens who can, navigate public transportation worldwide than actual, developing kind of public knowledge that is rich and deep and embedded in local cultural context.
Are you saying it's not enough to buy a Eurail pass?
I mean, that's important, but as part of that process. But and even a Eurail pass is at least 2 months, right? So you're already talking about a longer experience than what most people are.
Tom, your book is incredibly provocatively titled "The Death of Expertise," and I wonder. It probably had an audience in mind that was not just universities, but talk to me a little bit about whether you see a death of expertise in universities too.
Well, I think universities, where the intellectuals have to bear their burden here, and this is related to the point Cynthia was making, that universities have become increasingly the province of jargon, of specialized theory, rather than knowing, theorizers rather than knowers. I think in a lot of universities, the term public intellectual is almost said with derision, that you are not a real scholar if you are a public intellectual and you do something like we're doing right now. I think part of the problem that Cynthia was talking about, for example, with globalization and traveling, there was, at least in political science, for years there's a very strong attack on area specialists. That the idea that you could learn to speak Indonesian and you went to Jakarta and you studied the Indonesian system, oh, that's for saps. Yeah. What really matters is empirical, high quality, scientifically testable data. And so you had people who knew everything about a particular model and knew nothing about Indonesia. And so a gap started to develop between the ability of these academics to talk about their area and what the public needed to know. So there is, I mean, I still put most of the burden, part of the reason the book's provocative is I put a lot of the burden on the public, because the public just doesn't ask these questions, they don't pay attention, they have short attention spans, they'd rather watch TV. But intellectuals and academics have to bear their share of the
They have a greater role, they should play a greater role in engaging the public.
And yes, and it's not fun. I mean, this is something that, I mean, in a pleasant environment like this, it's wonderful. We're sitting here talking, but sometimes giving a public lecture, it's open to the public and you're talking about something controversial, it can be very unpleasant. But I would argue, as intellectuals, that is part of our obligation to society, is to engage in those things.
I want to ask you both about a trend that we've been seeing lately in the last couple of years in international enrollment in the United States. The data that we've been reporting from the Institute of International Education shows that for at least 2 years, there has been a decline in the number of new international students coming to the United States. Some people are speculating that perhaps this is a result influenced by President Trump and the Trump administration's policies on student visas and immigration. I wondered if you have any concerns about this decline in international enrollment into the United States, and if you have any theories on what might be causing it.
I mean, I have some concerns, obviously. I'm a proponent of flows of global students and scholars, but one of the things I would say is that I think there's a maximum capacity that we're always going to hit with in-person exchanges, whatever they are. I think globally, it's something like 2% of students are participating in some kind of in-person, face-to-face exchange. And connecting back to the tech issue, one of the things I think is really underexplored, but an exciting new direction is the area of virtual exchange. And I think President Obama announced an initiative, the Christopher Stevens Initiative, in 2015 to fund virtual exchange. And now the EU has funded it as well under the Erasmus initiative for virtual exchange, which takes really high quality, semester-long courses of students in Texas and Pakistan and brings them together in rigorous ways that is a deep cross-cultural experience, not just the 1 week of learning public transportation. So I think when we think about international exchange, we have to think, what's the point of it? We want rigorous, cross-cultural, deep engagement that helps people cross boundaries and reduce polarization in this country and outside of this country. And ideally, international exchange can do that. But I think it's coming physically to one country or going physically to another is not the only way to do that. So, I mean, I have concerns about it. I do think there's some connection to the bans, the visa bans, but I think there are other ways that we can achieve some of the same goals.
Tom, do you have any thoughts on the trend of inflow being reduced into the United States?
Yeah, I'm not known as someone who's ever stinting in criticism of the president and his administration, but I don't think that's it. I think, as Cynthia does, I think at some point you reach a kind of natural topping out level. And I'm even going to say something counterintuitive, which may be that there's a positive effect underlying this, because one of the things I noticed when I was writing The Death of Expertise and I was looking at colleges was how many small colleges had rebranded themselves as universities, in ways that made no sense. I mean, if you come from the academic world, there is a huge difference between a college and a university. And suddenly you had these very small colleges or state colleges that had been teachers' colleges rebranding themselves as universities as though they had like a particle collider, and what I realized they were doing was rebranding to attract foreign students. And I'm not sure that because foreign students don't want to come to a college, they want a degree from a university. And I'm not sure it's healthy to build programs at schools that are already on shaky academic ground, primarily organized around drawing in foreign money to hand out degrees. And if that starts to settle back down and students start saying, well, maybe I can get some courses by distance or take them another country, that may actually be a good thing, because I think that explosion of programs was unsustainable. And I think we're seeing that, and I don't think it has anything to do with Trump.
So this could be just a simple supply and demand issue that is sort of naturally, this would be happening in any administration. Republican or Democrat.
We don't, we're social scientists, so we don't have the data yet. And going on the rule that anecdotes count as data, I will say anecdotally that I already saw this drop off in some of my classes. I mean, again, outside of the government institutions, I already saw some of this drop off long before Donald Trump was president.
Okay, I'm going to ask the magic wand question of each of you, and you got about 60 seconds apiece. The magic wand question is this: if you could wave one wave of the wand tomorrow to fix one thing in higher education, what would it be? Go.
Oh, it's easy. I have to tell you, I am still signing approval forms on paper that has carbon copies. I can't tell you how many generations behind we are in terms of matching where students are in the kind of seamlessness that their lives are outside of campus, when they can order a car from their phone, when they can pay. I think I bought a house from my phone, like with a DocuSign, but I can't approve a course with a form. So we are technologically so far behind. If I could just get an app to approve student forms, to let them register, to do the kind of seamless life that exists outside of campus. If we could bring that kind of tech and innovation to campus to make everything flow more smoothly, I think we'd see much more resilience in our students.
So it's about cutting the bureaucracy with
bureaucracy, it's innovation, and it's a culture of change that will recognize that the way we work on campus is so far removed from how our younger generation is living their lives that causes frustration for them in ways that lead to failure to persist and all kinds of other anxieties.
Tom, wave your wand.
I will end with a highly contrarian argument here and say that the virtualization of education, including distance and virtual programs and all that stuff, the one thing I would wave my wand and say is to the extent that this is based on the idea that everybody needs to go to college, I would stop saying that. We have propagandized multiple generations of young people into believing that the only path in life is to go to college. And if you can't go to a residence college, then you go to a distance college. If you can't do that, you take some courses. And we end up with people on, demographically who have had some college or not really a college experience. And I think there are a lot of jobs and a lot of paths to happiness in the world that don't involve college, and we need to stop saying that.
Wow, so that's a controversial one, but that's probably a subject for another discussion. So listen, I think we're unfortunately out of time right now, but this was a great talk. Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Tom. Thank you all for being here, and have a great day.
Thank you.